Today we're going to be talking about filling out EH&E chain of custody forms. Every sample that EH&E collects needs to be documented on a chain of custody form. Typically we collect samples in the field and collect the field information on a field data sheet. The samples also have to be documented on a chain of custody. Often we're filling chain of custodies out to send samples to the laboratory for analysis, but sometimes we collect samples and archive them for various reasons. And even in that case, it's important to fill out a chain of custody to, for example, the FOSC, so that they can archive the samples properly and have the record of that. I'm going to talk about filling out a chain of custody form for tape samples that were collected, 2 tape samples, 1 a sample and a blank. But this process is applicable to virtually every kind of sample that we collect in the field. When you're filling out chains of custody forms, we have 4 copies. So it's important when you are filling out the original that you press hard enough so that the information will be transmitted to all 4 copies. So you have to press hard and use an appropriate pen. So the chain of custody form is standard to EH&E. We fill out first the date, and then 2. If it's going to a laboratory, that's who it should be. So for example, I'm going to fill this out to MLab P and K. We also need to document the EH&E project number, 80053. And if we have an EH&E PO number, if we don't have it, we can also use the project number for the PO number. On the chain of custody, we have 4 fields that need to be filled out. The first one is sample ID. Each sample should have a unique ID. Sample type. In this case, the sample type is tape sample. So I'll say tape. Analytical method number. In this case, I'm going to say direct microscopic exam for mold. And then the last field is an other field, time, date, or volume. Depending on the type of sample, this can be critical for holding time documentation. It also is a way to communicate to the lab the volume for air samples so that they can do calculations of concentrations. In this case, it doesn't matter, so we're just going to put a dash. When you fill out a chain of custody, it's important that all the lines be filled, so that in this case, I'm only using the top 2 lines, so I'm going to cross out the remainder of the lines on the form. Now we have to, in this case, tell the laboratory some information about the samples and how we want the results. In this case, we're going to click standard turnaround time. We also have options to rush the samples by a given date or time. Also options to indicate some other condition like archive. We can indicate whether they should be faxed. We can indicate that we want the laboratory to return the samples to us after analysis. We also click electronic transfer to the EH&E data coordinator account, as well as if additional people need to get the lab report when it's available. So in this case, I'll put my email address on here. Most important thing about the chain of custody is that it documents that the samples were in our custody from the time that they were collected until the time they arrived at the laboratory. So it's important that we sign relinquish. If, for example, we're transferring samples within EH&E between, for example, the FOSC and then the lab, we can transmit custody from the person that collected them in the field to the FOSC. And in every case that the samples are transmitted, there should be a signature indicating the transfer of the samples. So I'm going to also indicate the date that I am relinquishing the samples. When the laboratory receives the chain of custody with the samples, they will sign that they received them and when. And then the completed chain of custody form with both signatures will come back with the laboratory report at the end, and that closes the loop on the custody. Also, there's a field at the bottom to indicate that this is, how many pages is this set of samples. In this case, it's just 1 of 1. when we are sending samples to the laboratory, we send the samples along with the original chain of custody and the yellow copy that's below it. The pink copy is intended for the project manager, and then the gold copy is retained for EH&E records. We also scan all chain of custodies and field data sheets to the project file on the P drive for record keeping purposes. That's how to fill out a chain of custody form.